This is May 2nd, 2023. I'm Melissa Ackerman. I will be interviewing Stanley Rabin. Hi, Stan.
Hi.
How are you today?
Glad to be here.
First, just wanted to find out where you grew up, and if you didn't grow up in Dallas, what brought you here?
Okay. Which is actually a long story, but I'll make it quick. So I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, the real New York City, and my parents were immigrants much earlier. They came from, my father from Belarus, my mother from Ukraine. It was Russia then, and they left because of the pogroms and never got past New York. So that's where I grew up, was there all the way through college. Then I left, never to live again in New York.
What brought you down here?
So I met my wife, Barbara, in California, actually. But she was from Texas, and then she was from Borger, Texas. And other than both being Jewish, you could not have grown up more differently. My apartment building in the Bronx had 90 Jewish families, because there were 90 apartments and everybody was Jewish. Just Barbara and Borger, there were 10 Jewish families total. So it's just remarkable how we met. California fell in love, but the reason we moved to Texas was I came with commercial metals in Dallas, and the reason I was an engineer originally, and when I graduated college, interest in history as a metallurgical engineer, steel companies, aluminum companies, copper, brass companies would not hire me because I was Jewish. And they ended up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the nuclear program. And that was 59. Then in 64, I was there 5 years except for 6 months in the Army. GE hired me, and they were one of the first major companies to break through all that garbage and said, I'm sure they were at a board meeting and said, this is really dumb. We're not hiring these well-educated, ambitious, hardworking young people. And they switched me to the business side. But I wanted to get back with metals, and they were extremely fair. And I heard commercial metals was starting to grow and expand and diversify. And sure enough, I got a position with them. So we came here in January of 1970. And as they say, the rest is history. 38 years later, I retired from commercial metals.
And you had a family?
Yes.
Any children?
So we had 2 children who were actually born in California, but grew up here. Andy Rabin, who lives in Dallas, and Nancy Rothfeder, who lives in Houston. Daughter lives in Houston. And so, unfortunately, they both left, but then came back to Texas. Mm-hmm.
Any grandchildren?
So we have 5 grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And the oldest is just turned 23, and he's graduating this month from Princeton, which is another interesting story because when I applied to college and I went to Columbia, which had a quota, but I didn't even apply to a school like Princeton because if you were Jewish, there was no chance. I mean, it's remarkable how a lot of these changed for the better. Even with all the issues of anti-Semitism and all that, there was a lot of progress made over the years in a lot of areas, and so and then the youngest is 16, is here in high school, and next fall there'll be 4 of the 5 will be in college. Well, no, 1 will be working. I'm sorry, there'll be 3 of the 5. The oldest one will be working in New York.
Very exciting. So how did you get involved in working with the Federation?
So that began a long time ago, and my first gift, which was, we were in California, was $25. And at that time, even though I had grown up very Jewishly, not kosher, but very Jewishly, with a very strong Hebrew education, all that. And we already were involved. We joined a congregation, a Reform because we had to make a choice there because Barbara was Reform and I was conservative. But I hadn't had, at that point, any contact with Federation. So once my first $25 gift, I said, I need to learn more about this organization.
Somebody just call you up
Yeah.
to ask you for a gift?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then when we moved to Texas, of course, to Dallas, Commercial Metals particularly had a fairly strong Jewish presence, foremost of whom was Jake Feldman, for whom the building is named. And it was his family that, it's a public company, but it was his family that his father that founded the company way back when, like in 1915.
Mm-hmm.
So I started getting involved. We both did in Jewish stuff, and right after we moved here, and my first, what really got me involved, probably in '78, Barbara and I went to Israel for the first time on a Southwest mission.
Not a Federation mission.
But it was organized
Okay.
by Federation, and so it was Dallas, San Antonio, probably Houston, Austin. I remember totally, but that was a major development in terms of getting more. And then I got very involved with Jewish Family Service, and I was president mid-'80s, I think it was, and I just got more involved as time went on with different, but because of my business career and traveling a lot, I generally would have to focus on one organization at a time, which is at least how I did it.
Mm-hmm.
But
What was the Federation's official name during your tenure?
well, it became the Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas in maybe in the mid '70s. But we also used to use the UJA term a lot, especially for the Israel stuff. Mm-hmm.
What were the years of your term?
So it was 1993 to 1995.
And what was your title at that point?
President. Cherokee. That happened later. And a lot of Jewish, not just Jewish, nonprofits have done that. Used to call
Switched it around from president to chair, and the executive is.
And the staff, the CEO became president, was then used to be executive director, was a common title, but then became president.
And who was the executive director?
Avram Cohn.
And who were some of the different leaders, lay leaders during your tenure?
So it was Schoenbrunn, Larry Schoenbrunn, Don Schaefer. That I've got here. Andrew Weinstein, Peggy Tobolowsky, Steve Waldman, Jim Hogue, the Prescotts, Jeff Seymour. Pretty amazing group at the time.
Mm-hmm. And what was the relationship between the Federation and the synagogues and temples at that time?
I'd say more peripheral, because we already were quite involved with Temple Emmanuel, where we joined. In fact, I eventually, after Federation, I became president of Temple, like Tex Fagado did, of Temple. And Harold Kleiman, I think, had done that. So we had a little trajectory going there. But I think in those days there was not a negative, but maybe less involvement with the synagogues. Not a negative one, but just
different.
Just different.
And how did the Dallas Jewish community interact with the Dallas secular community?
Not enough, I actually would say in hindsight. I think we should have been doing more. And we had some interaction, and some of the, a lot of our focus in those years was on, we referred to them as the constituent agencies, the three main ones being Jewish Family Service, the center, and Golden Acres, and that was a lot of our focus. And as an example, Jewish Family Service got major funding from United Way, as well as the Federation. So there was some interaction that way as well.
Were there some coalitions with organizations or government outside of the Jewish community?
Not that I can recall. Barbara and I also got very involved over the years with the non-Jewish community, like United Way. But I'd say I wouldn't say there was much interaction.
Mm-hmm. What significant local, national, or international events had an effect on your era?
So there were quite a few. That was 90, especially 95. But one of the major events over a number of years was Soviet Jewry, and including we always had a significant effort in Dallas in helping resettle Jews from the Soviet Union. So that was one. There weren't globally. It was a bit of a quiet. There were problems in the Balkans, and there's always places. And then, of course, Israel was already, a major factor, and that was the year. But that was after my presidency, late in the year, November, I think it was, of '95, when Rabin my namesake, was assassinated. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you a quick story about that. Not right now.
No. We'd love to hear it.
No, it's better to wait with that.
Okay. What was the relationship with Dallas and Israel during that time?
So it was really building, and this was probably, certainly I would consider it, the highlight of my presidency was the Minyan mission.
That was the big one, the really big one.
And the reason we called it the Minyan mission, because there were 10 buses. Mm-hmm. And El Al, we chartered a plane, and there was tremendous staff and lay leadership, what you can imagine. And I think the final number that went was like 433 leaders. I mean, just at all levels of involvement, both lay and staff, and including a direct flight to Israel, and it was in February, basically the second half of February of '95, and that just, I think that was a transformative event. Got so many people involved or more involved, mm-hmm. Particularly with Israel. And the Rabin story is, so when we arrived, he was the prime minister, so because it was such a major mission, he was going to do the greeting. And so I had been to Israel already now a number of times, and so I had met him, and I knew he didn't have much of a sense of humor. So because I was president, I got to introduce him. So I give the perfunctory introduction, and I said, oh, and by the way, since we have the same name, I think we're related. Emes, you can't make this up. So he gets up there, and for the first several minutes, explains how it's impossible that we're related. Like, the last thing I need is another relative from the U.S. So that was cute. So.
That is funny. That is funny. Mm-hmm. So who were the prominent supporters for Israel during that time? Lay leaders.
Oh, well, there were a number of foundations, and of course the Feldman Foundation was always a major factor. And in Dallas, Robert was the one who had stayed here and was here. Of course, we were very close with Jake and Sarah. So Feldman's, Waldman. I mean, just a lot of the Glazer and, a lot of the prominent families who then, but one of the things I think that's characterized Dallas, particularly because of the in-migration like us, is so many people who were involved with Federation weren't born here, or something that didn't grow up here. So, and that would be true of a lot of Texas, like Barbara, who were from Texas, but was from a different part of Texas.
Where was that small town? What was that close to?
In Amarillo, in the Panhandle.
Oh. That's the big city.
That's the big city.
Okay.
So there have been Jews here from Borger, from Pampa, which is in that same area, from Amarillo. Farther away would be like Lubbock, but Texas is so big that it's really interesting. So like the people I know, mostly not Jewish, from Borger, most didn't go to UT. If they went to college, they went to Texas Tech or OU. Those were much closer schools. So I'm in Austin. It was like going to Rome.
I can see how that would be felt. What changes have you experienced in the Dallas community over the years?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes, of course, is because of the migration here. A lot of people have moved here and broadened the Jewish community and broadened the general community. So I think that's been one of the biggest factors. In Federation, one of the biggest changes, which is similar to what United Way, but what to me is still such a positive factor is the collective impact, how positive that can be. But a lot of people now, over time, more want to make direct gifts to the beneficiaries. So that's been a challenge that's being faced, but has compared with the period like when I was president. I mentioned the constituent agencies. We were big funders of those, and they had already started doing their own fundraising.
But it wasn't nearly
like
it is now.
Right.
It was like much more of a side thing, and just not tapping in as much to the
right
Federation base.
And another big would be I would say, more direct involvement with Israel. I say there was already through UJ, there was already a strong existing relationship. But for example, when Federation here added that in the Western Galilee, added our own direct effort in. And I've gotten very familiar with Israel over the years because I've been there 30 times.
Wow. Okay.
And that's been a big change as well.
Do you think the community was more focused on Israel back when you were president, or and in a more cohesive way, or you feel like Israel's getting the same amount of support now?
I think people are more involved with Israel now. Then I say that Minion mission or Mega mission is going, I think, had a significant influence in changing that involvement, because one of the things for sure, and I'm a big proponent of missions, is to see it. You have to see it to understand. And for example, the security situation in Israel. And you can read all the books or all the paper and say, oh, it's a small country. But when you get there and see how small it is, it's just startling the first time you see that. And just things like that have such a and then to the degree you develop relationships with different people or organizations there, and
Yeah. The Jewish day schools, were they much of a factor back when you were president?
I don't remember them being such a factor. And now our kids went to public school, and they went because, and that's not where we lived, but our first house, which was the first house I'd ever lived in, was in Richardson School District. So they went to Richardson schools.
So, what changes did you experience in the Federation over the years?
Of course, one big change was to make the foundation separate. And I do have a significant involvement with the foundation as well as Federation. And so that's been a change. And I think we need to do some work there, and hopefully we can, bringing the two even, closer together. Like I say, the agency, just a lot of agencies or others doing their own fundraising. And of course, over time, in the Jewish world as well as the general world, certain organizations come and go, or their purpose changes. So, like Jewish National Fund, which was planning in Israel, it's changed. So it still exists, but it's a different.
Yes, dramatically.
Dramatically.
Mm-hmm. In relation to your time at the Federation, of what are you most proud?
I think the mission, the Minyan mission. I think that was such a positive that, but also that we stuck to the mission. A lot has changed, and I probably should have said this earlier, but the mission of Federation has not changed. And I think that's true of, in my own experience, a lot of the very good and strong nonprofits, is the mission doesn't change. The way you operate changes, or how you set priorities, et cetera, changes, but it's the same mission.
Year after year, generation after generation.
And Jewish continuity. And
That's wonderful. Are there any special experiences or stories during your tenure that you'd like to share, or anything else that we haven't covered?
Well, I gave you the one, the one about.
You already gave me the Rabin
Yeah,
story.
No, just it was interesting for me. My biggest challenge was because I travel a lot on business, and so I was gone a fair amount. So to find time to do it was not easy, and to do it purposely, and so that for me personally was probably the biggest challenge. But
that was before emails and constantly being able to reach people.
But I had learned one thing. I don't know if I had learned it from the business or whatever, but surround yourself with really good people, staff, and that if you do that, that can the organizational function much better. And even if you don't travel a lot on business. And
well, you've done so many wonderful things, and we really appreciate you sitting down today. Thank you very much for coming in. Enjoyed talking to you.
Well, I'm happy. Can you think of anything else that we should cover? Or?
You can. We've got plenty of time if you want to talk about anything in your history or growing up or that you want to share. We got plenty of time.
Well, like I say, in my own history, was the I would say more, not so much the anti-Semitism, but the having to overcome quotas, and how and that was such a positive change in many respects. And Barb and I thought alike in many things, but including that one. And if there was a hotel, an example would be the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, which her family knew a little bit, and we started going there 1 week every summer as the kids were growing up. And at one time it didn't allow Jews. But we both, and that had been my own history, Barbara said, if something changed, support it. Because you could say, and some people do, and I'm not being critical, just we all react the way we react, but some people will say, no, I wouldn't belong there because they wouldn't. And what really triggered that for me was my GE experience, where they changed and were so fair, and I saw that if you can help with change, accept it and then promote it, and then hopefully it disappears. So we both always felt strongly about that, and happy to see those things breaking down. But it was interesting to see how those things changed. And so, like, when our kids, Andy went to Duke and Nancy went to Georgetown because of the nurse, she became a nurse because of their excellent nursing program. So Andy, and when he was a freshman, he called to tell us the fraternity he was joining, and I almost dropped the phone because this was one of these fraternities that in my day you couldn't belong. And I didn't drop the phone because I didn't want to belong. It was just, and that fraternity was probably, say, 20% Jewish, like the school was, but it had changed. And then, of course, Nancy had all the Jesuit friends at Georgetown. But these were, and subsequently, after she graduated, Georgetown now has a Jewish center. So, even with all the challenges with the anti-Semitism, there are...
I was going to ask you about that next.
Yeah, that I can... what's happened, I think, with the anti-Semitism, and I have to get a little political here, is it's coming... When I was growing up, essentially it came from the far right. Now a lot of it, especially the anti-Israel stuff, is coming from the far left. And, of course, extreme Muslims. And I'm involved with AJC. In other words, we work hard with the Muslim community, but the fact is there is an element of the Muslim community where they just hate Jews. And you have to face that and work to correct it, but you have to face these things. And it's a little bizarre. I see it with the grandkid trying to get into college, where now if you're Jewish, you're white and privileged, which blows my mind. And so these things change over time, but I think it's important to recognize how they've changed and how to deal with those. And unfortunately, and it's a real problem on some college campuses, as you know well. And that's a tough one to do. A lot of Jewish organizations are really trying to deal with it, but it's a toughie, and particularly if the administrations at the schools don't take a stand and allow Jewish students to be intimidated and that kind of stuff. So that's a definite challenge. And
now that you're retired, are you still doing volunteer work for different agencies?
Probably, I'm doing much less travel. And I did have that, I was president of JDC, the Joint, which was international. So that was 4 years. That involved
was a 4-year stint as president.
Yeah, and that was a lot of
a lot of
effort and
traveling.
travel,
Yes.
and Barbara did some. That was before she got sick. So, and as you know, that's besides the Jewish Agency. You know, I mean the two major Jewish organizations. And I've been to Ukraine a half dozen times.
Really?
Yeah, I should. Yeah. And all of that since that was all with JDC, because we did commercial metals. We had a big international business, and we did business in a number of communist countries, but Ukraine was not one of them because it was so corrupt, and we weren't going to do anything with anywhere where it was too corrupt. And so we did in Poland, Hungary. In fact, Commercial Metals has a steel mill in Poland, of all, right, which was after communism fell that we bought that mill, and it's been a very successful investment for CMC. But I do in the nonprofit stuff. Involved with Federation, Holocaust Human Rights Museum, UTD Holocaust Studies Program, the Dallas Jewish Community Foundation, AJC is did I mention Temple?
No.
Oh, Temple. JFS.
A lot of wonderful organizations.
And in the nonprofit, there's 3: United Way, Dallas Symphony, which is obviously different, and Texas Health Resources. And what happened there was Presby Hospital is part of Texas Health. In 2003, it actually happened. Several Jewish doctors came to me, and I was still working. I retired in 2008. Said, would I consider joining the board of Texas Dallas? We called it Presby then, yeah. And I thought about it, I said, yeah. And so that's been very interesting.
Really?
And it's, I mean, healthcare is totally unlike anything else I've tried to understand. Impossible.
Okay, well, you're still staying busy, and I imagine you see your kids and your grandkids. Anything else? It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay, thank you
Good.
very much.
Oh, thank you.